how much of programming or coding is required for them to learn?
So a lot of you guys have been asking me about cloud networking as a career option. So what I thought is, instead of me doing some research on Google and helping you out with these questions, I thought I would invite Jimmy, who is a cloud network security architect in a Fortune 500 company. So there is no better person than Jimmy who can answer these questions, because he has huge experience in cloud networking space, in on-premise networking space. He has 20 years of experience. He worked on AWS, he worked on GCP, and he's going to work on Azure. So it was awesome to have Jimmy helping us to answer all your questions. So I've thoroughly enjoyed speaking to Jimmy, and I have asked all the questions that you have posted to me in comments as well as in the community posts. So if I have missed anything, please let me know in the comment section. I hope you would enjoy this video. So watch it till the end, and hopefully all your questions would be answered by end of this video.
All right, Jimmy, thank you for joining. It's awesome to have you here. And thank you for giving your time to my YouTube family, because there are a lot of people who want to get into networking as a career, and they have a lot of questions on cloud. And again, thank you so much for joining. So could you please introduce yourself to the viewers?
Absolutely. First off, let me say it's an honor for you to ask me to do this. I'm absolutely happy to do it. My name is Jimmy McEvoy. I am a cloud network security architect for a large Fortune 500 company, and I have about 22 years of experience in both physical data center and cloud-based networking and security.
Thank you, Jimmy. So, Jimmy, one common question that I get from my viewers is, like, how can they get into cloud networking? Like, if they are currently network engineers on a data center, how can they become a cloud networking engineer?
Well, and actually, it's really not that different. So rather than the day-to-day, I'm physically going to slap a router into the data center, or I'm going to cable up something, or I'm even going to work with a remote team to install this kind of equipment. It's really now, instead of this long form and teams upon teams of it, it's a couple of lines of code. As far as how do you get into that, I may not be the best person to answer that, since I was literally thrown into the cloud environment somewhere in circa 2017. How does one get into it? Really by playing. Take what you know, go spend the time with a cloud provider. Spend a little time just researching the documentation. One of the things that I see in this that maybe some of the typical on-premise engineers may not do for is go learn something new, go do something new. Just because it's not what you've done day to day doesn't mean you shouldn't go try to experiment. So that's really my course for getting into it, I should say.
So what would you suggest is, like, if they are currently working in a data center networking, it's not going to be different, but they have to upskill themselves and then look out for the jobs, for jobs that can offer cloud networking engineer or something like that, correct?
That's absolutely correct.
This company is not offering that role for them.
That's absolutely correct. Okay. So unfortunately, there's no clear-cut path. If your current job really has no intentions of adopting cloud, you're definitely not going to get into it. Right. You're absolutely correct.
So if I were to learn like the cloud networking engineer, Jimmy, and if I want to get into a company where they have this cloud, where they are trying to adopt to cloud, so like, what do I have to do? Like, do I have to do usual CCNA certification that I have, with me, or any other certification that you would recommend for them to get into cloud, or cloud networking certifications, something like that?
I think if you're a starting out network engineer and you don't have that CCNA, that is absolutely a good place to start. Cloud networking really is no different than on-premise networking, with the exception of, just like any other network, you have the caveats of the tools in your toolbox. So you're absolutely going to run into things that are different. Routing tables can't be, more than 50, and those types of things. But you can't get away from basic routing and networking 101. I absolutely encourage anyone who doesn't have a CCNA to absolutely do so before trying to get into networking of any kind, including cloud.
Okay, so the path would be they have to learn the basics of networking Obviously, if they are network engineers, then that is a good thing. They will be obviously working on some basics of networking. But for people who would like to become the network engineers, so for them as well, you would suggest them to start with the basics of networking and then do CCNA if possible, or it's absolutely needed, right? That's what you said. It's
absolutely. Nothing really changes, or is nothing really magical. Layer 3 is layer 3, and all of that still applies. So, like I said, it's really no different in that standpoint of, I know the limitations of my switcher router that I'm working on. If it's a physical environment, I know the limitations of AWS, GCP, Azure, or so on and so forth. So all the same basic concepts apply with some new limits on your tools, is what it really boils down to.
I mean, do they have to do CCNP as well, or it's not required?
I don't think that's as much a requirement. So it really comes down to the size of the environment that you're working in. So if you're working for a large Fortune 500 enterprise like myself, absolutely CCNP is going to do you well, because you're dealing primarily with hybrid clouds. You're still dealing with that overall architecture of that enterprise with cloud inserted into it. If you're working for a small SMB to where it's fully public cloud, probably not so much.
Okay, and if they do CCNA and CCNP or CCNA, right? And if they want to apply for jobs in cloud as a cloud network engineer, do they have to do the cloud network certification as well? Like if AWS has a specialty exam for network engineer, I think so does GCP has. Each service provider have their own, again, networking specialty exams, right, Jimmy? So what would you suggest?
I would, if you have the ability to do so, I would absolutely suggest that you go ahead and do it. Is it a requirement? No, more than likely not. But like I said, there's a difference in the networking. Like I said, it's not really a specialty or the limits, but it's understanding the tools that you have involved. And each cloud is actually very different in how they do a lot of things. So if you want to spend the time and you have the ability to go get that certification in cloud networking specialty for AWS, I can't remember what the certification is for Google. I personally don't have them, plain and simply because I have the experience. But from a person who's just now getting into the cloud environment, absolutely. The more education you have, the better, and the better it's going to look for you.
Okay, thank you, Jimmy. The other question is, if in your day-to-day tasks or work you do, right, how much of programming or coding is required for them to learn? I mean, this is a very common question that I get.
So I wouldn't want a future network cloud engineer thinking that, God, I have to go learn coding. I have to be an application developer. But what I will say is those are very handy tools to have. And I don't think you don't need to go out and figure out how to do C++ or Golang or anything like that. Today in my job, I do a lot of Python, do a lot of Ansible, and I do a lot of Terraform.
Okay.
Those are the things that I use on a day-to-day basis, primarily Terraform because I'm working with multiple clouds, Python because if I want to write some code, I don't want to be the only engineer who knows it. So when you get into your team, you're going to find out who knows what, and you're going to use whatever tools that those teams have available for you. And in my particular team, like I said, those are Python, Ansible, and Terraform.
Yeah, usually in the operations role, in the networking role, in the security role, whenever there is a scope for automation, I think Python would be definitely helpful, right? I think it's better for people to learn Python.
Absolutely. Python is one of the more popular languages. Python gets the job done very well.
Right.
And like I said, unless you want to be the one-man army, and I highly recommend that you do not, you want to pick something that's going to be usable by not only yourself, but multiple members of your team to be able to support and function day to day.
Okay. So Jimmy, usually, let's say I'm working in a role in my company, right? And I'm not getting much pay, or I'm not getting much raise or hike, and I'm a network engineer. So what people are asking is, would you suggest them to jump into a DevOps engineer role or any other role in the cloud? Or do you see a network engineer has still a huge scope in the cloud service provider world or in the cloud world? So the question was do you see the network engineer role diminishing, or it's going to be very helpful in future for people?
So, and this is a bit of a loaded question.
Yeah.
I will say that a DevOps engineer with some networking programming would put you in a very unique position. Day to day, I deal with a lot of application teams who don't really understand the basics of networking. So for those folks, no, I don't see the network engineer going away anytime soon. I'm far more busier now than I ever was in an on-premise role. So there's always going to be the need for that network professional to understand the nuances of what's happening at the sublayer beneath the application.
Right. That makes sense. I think it's because it's like a security role, right? It has its own niche, it's cannot be done by anybody else. So whether you do an on-prem or cloud, you still have to know the basics of it and you have to know what to do. Right.
And a lot of one of the things that we learned while we were moving our migration from AWS is a lot of those teams actually fail because they think that, well, networking is all code now, so we don't really need a networking team. And you'll find out really quick that that's absolutely not going to be the case.
Okay, so Jimmy, speaking of networking on cloud, I heard this term SDN NFE more often. What is your take on that? Do people have to learn SDN NFE concepts?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So SDN is kind of a dynamic way of doing the physical on-prem network. So it's kind of a virtualization on-premise. Really doesn't have a whole lot of bearing in most of the cloud environments because a lot of that is abstracted from the general user in the first place. So for example, I might have these giant routing tables and have to automate some of that setup, and that really doesn't come into most of the clouds, at least the three major ones that I deal with.
Okay, awesome. So Jimmy, having worked with AWS and you're also working with Google Cloud, I know, and now maybe in future Azure, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is a sort of a funny question, but which cloud do you think has the best networking in the terms of based on your experience?
AWS, hands down.
Really? Okay.
Absolutely. So, and again, this is also a bit of a loaded question because it's going to depend on what the workloads that you're talking about for. So I started with AWS. AWS actually has a special place in my heart, just plain and simply because it's my first cloud that I used. But also over time, especially somewhere in 2018, 2019, I honestly don't remember which, AWS introduced the Nitro instances. Nitro instances have their own specialized sub-networking. So one of the things, me especially as a network security engineer, where I might be inserting a web application firewall or a standard traditional layer 3 firewall, is the throughput of a virtual machine. AWS Nitro instances are capable of 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, and even up to 400 gigabits of throughput. No other cloud has that currently.
Okay. But overall, in the terms of networking, for example, if I go through the GCP documentation, they say we have the global network as opposed to AWS, local network for VPC. Like VPC in GCP is global, which is not the case in AWS. How much would that make a difference? For example, if I were to create a load balancer, I can just create a normal load balancer and balance it with 2 regions in GCP versus with AWS. Maybe you have to use our own.
And again, so that changes almost daily. So AWS is, and I take it back, not just AWS, all of the clouds are releasing new features and new updates. Like I said, almost daily. I literally have an RSS reader set up to see all the announcements from the vendors that I deal with every day because there's some new feature. I've literally changed a lot of our designs 3 or 4 times across all of the clouds. From that type of networking standpoint, I say AWS is just as capable as GCP. So GCP load balancers offer what's called Anycast. AWS, what's called a global accelerator, which achieves the exact same thing. I think AWS has a more robust delivery for web-based and web tier applications. I think GCP has a little bit more scalability for if your applications are non-web based, if that makes sense.
Okay. So if I were to get into network engineer as a cloud network engineer, then it's better for me to start with AWS. That's what you would recommend?
I personally would recommend it. AWS has the market share. AWS has the features that most of your, and I'm speaking from an enterprise, of course. So again, all of this comes down to the workloads that you're dealing with. And as an enterprise engineer, AWS has definitely been the better network for us to work with.
Right. And also, I think there are other factors as well, right, Jimmy? Let's say if I'm in a company and my company is investing more on Azure or GCP, then in that case, if I'm a network engineer, I think it's easier to get into that cloud when compared to AWS, because I have to learn from scratch, and without any experience, I have to apply for a job outside, correct?
Absolutely. So it's always going to be, what does your job need first, and then what do you need to expand your horizons if you're not happy with that job or in your current position. So like I said, yeah, AWS for me, if I were in an Azure shop, the concepts remain the same. Like I said, it's a question of the underlying tools that the cloud provider gives you. I like AWS. I'm sure Azure has. And to be honest with you, I've not touched Azure yet. It's coming. I'm not there yet. From GCP standpoint, GCP has a little bit of lacking features in the enterprise.
Right. Yeah, it's not completely as mature as AWS, and
Absolutely.
AWS is well in front when compared to other clouds. So
one of the other things that I've dealt with a lot of times, and dealing with the three vendors that I work with, is AWS is more prone to listen to what the customer wants. And I'm not saying that people like Google or Azure or Oracle don't, but AWS seems to go that extra mile for us.
No, I totally agree with you, Jimmy, because they have that customer obsession mindset, especially it's their DNA, and everything that we say, they would listen and they would try to implement it in a month or something. They're very aggressive with that.
Absolutely. I actually meet with them every quarter on what new features are coming down the roadmap, and they spend an hour every quarter listening to me to what are my pain points, what can they do to improve the feature. I don't necessarily have that same voice with the other vendors.
Right. So if I learn AWS, Jimmy, and the concepts and all, will it be easy for me to just use those concepts in any other cloud, like Alibaba or whatever, Oracle, GCP, Azure?
Networking is kind of like programming. All of the concepts remain the same. It's just a difference in syntax. Is the best way I can go to say it.
Yeah, that's very well said. That is true. The other question that people asked me was, if you are fresh out of college, would you recommend them to learn a networking engineer as a profession, like to build their career in future?
Emphatically, yes. My son is 22 years old and literally just graduated college this summer, and that is the exact advice that I gave to him.
Like dad, like son. And you will be the best person for him to teach everything. I don't think he has to go anywhere.
I'm trying. Don't get me wrong. He still would rather stay home and play video games than go to work. But these are conversations I have actually had with my son. Yes.
Okay. So that question aside, what would be the salary for cloud network engineers or network engineers? Is it comparable to like security engineers or other domains?
In my limited understanding of it, yes. Given what I've seen and the offers that have come to me, even though I have no intention of leaving where I'm at, the offers are very on scale with where I'm at right now, looking in the brief time that I look around.
Awesome. And, most of my viewers are also from India, so you are only saying it based on the USA market, right? I mean, just a thing.
Unfortunately, that's the only market that I have any experience with.
Yeah. So Jimmy, if a person is like currently a database engineer, or a engineer like operations engineer or support engineer on premise, and he or she is having 8 years of experience, can they learn a network engineer and get into that, or get into cloud as a network engineer?
Given today's DevOps and SecOps and DevSecOps world, I would say absolutely.
Okay.
One of the benefits that I've always brought to the teams that I've dealt with, I didn't start as a network engineer. I started as a Linux support admin who did some DBA work, who started into some coding to get through his day, to turn to understanding the networking, which someone threw a firewall in my lap, and then I moved into security. Keep growing, keep learning, keep understanding, and don't paint yourself into a corner. You can absolutely do any of those things.
No, that's fantastic, Jimmy, because I think most of the people can relate to your background experience because you shifted many things in IT, instead of staying at one place. And that's where I think people are asking, like, can they, if they are a support engineer, can they become network engineer? So the answer is obviously yes. You just have to put in some effort.
Absolutely.
And get into that, right? Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, Jimmy, since you said AWS is your favorite cloud, what services in AWS from networking side you use most commonly in your day-to-day tasks?
So honestly, to be honest with you, day-to-day tasks involve, believe it or not, security groups more than anything else. And most of that is explaining to application teams what a security group actually is and what it does and goes on. But we also spend a lot of time, typical network development for the cloud is just like on-premise. You want to understand the requirements of your applications and then build to that, obviously realizing that those features at AWS or even any of the other clouds give you change over time. Just understanding how those impact your application teams and what those can do to improve their day-to-day lives. That's where I spend the bulk of my focus. To give you a perfect example, I developed our DMZ or internet-facing design for our applications. They really didn't like it at first because I was really limited by the features at first. And over the years, I've redeveloped that pretty much once a year for the last 3 or 4 years. And that's my day-to-day life, is figuring out how I can improve that to make that easier on the development teams.
Thank you, Jimmy. And so, like, how much of security plays a huge role in the cloud? Because on-premise, you have pretty much control of everything, right? And you see recently there are a lot of news about people hacking into cloud networks or applications. So how much of security does a cloud engineer has to learn to become a good cloud networking engineer?
As much as possible, and that's really where I'm going to leave it. So AWS especially has a very good guidelines on what is a well-architected framework, as well as blueprints for how to develop a lot of those applications. Listen to those and take them seriously, because that's where the security teams are looking as well. In my current location, we're a development of several core teams, and these are all questions that all 3 of the teams come together to answer. So that's security, networking, and governance all have these interchangeable roles. And understanding the fundamentals of those security designs is absolutely required.
Awesome. And do they have to learn the basics of security for that, or just understand from the cloud documentation itself, like the VPC flow logs or whatever? Because I'm not sure, because I'm not networking expert. I don't think you have flow logs in on-premise, right? That's a sort of
You're absolutely correct. So you have a whole lot of information available to you, and absolutely utilize them. It's helpful from a networking perspective, because now and I won't say every packet, but every flow is logged and recorded. So I know exactly where the application issues might lie from that particular standpoint. I lose a lot of visibility in search in place of on-premise, because now everything is encrypted, and or may not have been on-premise. So you're definitely relying on all of those, and they call them security factors, but they're also network troubleshooting tools as well.
Okay, so how many if you have tools in on-premise, right, Jimmy, can you use those tools, like, for example, the monitoring tools or whatever on cloud, or it's completely different paradigm on cloud?
I don't want to say it's completely different, but if your tools on premise aren't set up for something dynamic, then yes, you are going to retool. We rely heavily on a lot of the cloud-based functionality you do today. We don't actually utilize a lot of our on-premise stuff, plain and simply because we have the dynamic of networking on-premise is very static. Networking in AWS is very dynamic. So a lot of the tools that we've traditionally used do not. So we rely heavily on VPC flow logs. We rely heavily on CloudWatch logs and metrics from those. All of the clouds are very good at giving you the information. You just need to know where to go find them.
Right. Okay. Okay. I think that's all, Jimmy. Yeah. Yep. Perfect, Jimmy. I think that's all.
Cool.
So I'm gonna do some closing comments and we'll stop.
All right.
I think thank you so much. Sorry. Thank you so much, Jimmy. You have answered all the questions. And I think based on your experience, I'm sure my YouTube family is going to learn a lot from you because you're very relatable to them. Though you have huge experience, but the number of things you have learned in your IT, it's awesome. So thank you so much for providing your experience. And it was awesome conversation with you.
Thank you for having me, and you're very welcome.
Thanks, Jimmy.